Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I am Christina Henderson, Chair of the Transportation Planning Board, and I call today's September 18th meeting to order. We have several members who are participating here in person at the COG building and some virtually as well. For those participating virtually, in the event that you have some sort of disruption to your audio or video connection, shoot us an email or a text to the staff, and we will try to help you troubleshoot. This meeting is also being live streamed on TPB's YouTube page. I'm going to briefly review the process for today's hybrid meeting. We'll first start with a roll call of board members participating in the meeting to confirm that we have quorum. After that, we'll hear from comments from members of the public here, and staff will summarize comments received electronically. During the agenda items, I will have the presenters complete their briefings, and then we'll turn to the board members for questions or comments. I will call on members by jurisdiction. We don't have any action items today, so I will not be calling for any votes, but we do have some really good presentations that I hope you all engage on. For those of you who are participating virtually, if you could use the raised hand icon, and staff will make a note to help me call on you. I'm going to first call on the members here who are in the room because they're very much in my line of sight. But now we'll start with the roll call. Lynn?
Great, thanks. I do just want to add another little element of logistics. So closed captioning is available to everyone. For the members on WebEx, on your bottom left-hand corner, there's a little like balloon box thing with CC. If you click on that, closed captioning will be available. If you're streaming with us live, you just on the bottom right is the closed captioning for the YouTube. So anyway, on to roll call. I'm going to state your jurisdiction. If you could state your name, and I will capture you. Also, we're monitoring the participant chat. And for those of you in the room, hopefully you signed in, because that's another way to capture your participation. Starting with the District of Columbia, DC Council Charles Allen. DC Council, Ms. Christina Henderson.
Present.
DC Council, Matt Fruman.
Present.
Right. DC Department of Transportation.
Amanda Stout, present.
Thanks, Amanda. DC Office of Planning.
Rebecca Schwartzman, present.
Thank you. Moving on to Maryland, City of Bowie. Charles County. College Park.
Denise Mitchell, present.
Thank you. Frederick County.
Mark Mishler,
Jessica
present.
Fitzwater, hi, present.
Oh, got both of you, Ms. Fitzwater and Mark. Gotcha. City of Frederick.
Kelly Russell, present.
Thanks, Kelly. City of Gaithersburg. City of Greenbelt.
Kristen Weaver is present online.
Thank you. City of Laurel. Montgomery County.
Haley Peckett, present.
Thanks, Haley.
Marilyn Balcom, council member.
And I saw Miss Balcom online. Thank you. And I heard you too. Moving on to Prince George's County.
Victor Weisberg, present.
Thanks, Vic. City of Rockville. Tacoma Park. Maryland Department of Transportation.
Drew Morrison, present.
Thanks, Drew. Maryland House of Delegates.
Mark Corman online.
Thanks, Mark.
Chris Fair.
Maryland Senate.
Chris Fair.
Oh, Chris Fair too. Got you both. Got you both. Thank you. Maryland Senate. Okay, moving on to Virginia, City of Alexandria.
Kenneth, present.
Thanks, Kanik. Arlington County.
Takis Karantonis.
Thanks, Takis. City of Fairfax. Fairfax County.
James Walkinshaw, present.
Thank you.
And Walter Auckland.
Great, thank you. Falls Church.
Dave Snyder, present.
Gotcha. Loudoun County.
Rob Donaldson, present.
Thanks, Rob. City of Manassas.
Pam Sabeski, online.
Thanks, Pam. City of Manassas Park.
Jeanette Rischel here.
Gotcha, thank you. Prince William County.
Megan Landis, present.
Thanks, Megan. I believe Mr. Angry's coming soon. Virginia Department of Transportation.
Maria Senior, present.
Thanks, Maria. Virginia House of Delegates. Virginia Senate.
Jennifer Boysko.
Thank you. Moving on to WMATA. Our ex officio members, Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration, National Capital Planning Commission.
Hi, Michael Wyatt, online.
Thank you. Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority and National Park Service. That concludes roll call. We do have a quorum.
Thank you, Lynn. We'll now move on to public comments. Lynn, if you could recognize the members of the public who are here in person. You'll come up to the podium and provide their comments. To ensure there is sufficient time for everyone who has signed up, we request that everyone limit their remarks to 3 minutes. When you hear the beep, that is your cue to stop. Lynn?
Great, thanks. We have 2 speakers signed up, Mr. Richard Parsons and Mr. Jason Stanford. So Mr. Parsons, are you here? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, members of the board. It's great to see all of you again. My name is Richard Parsons, Vice Chair of the Suburban Maryland Transportation Alliance. I'd like to begin by commending the board, this board and the members of the COG board for developing an aggressive regional electric vehicle infrastructure implementation strategy. As your own data show, the single most impactful way to achieve greenhouse gas emission reductions from the transportation sector is to foster the speedy transition to zero-emission vehicles. The plan before you today is a major step in that direction, as the convenient location of charging stations is critical in making EVs a more viable option for consumers. But as we make this transition, I want to encourage you also, excuse me for my congestion here, I want to also encourage you to consider the broader fiscal implications of a transition away from gas-powered vehicles. As you know, a significant portion of the funding we receive in DC, Maryland, and Virginia to construct and operate our transit and road networks comes from gas taxes. And those revenues have already been declining significantly as fuel economy has continued to improve over the years. This is becoming a serious problem in Maryland, as our latest CTP indicates Maryland no longer even has enough state matching funds to qualify for all the federal grants we would otherwise be eligible for. As a result, needed projects, including state-of-the-art good repair and maintenance investments, are being deferred, which will only cost us more in the long run. We should encourage the use of EVs, but keep in mind they are roughly twice as heavy as gas-powered cars and cause more wear and tear. Yet they are effectively paying nothing to maintain the public infrastructure they use. We clearly need new revenue streams that more equitably assign costs based on usage. The aspirational elements of TPB's Visualized 2045 plan reflect this reality, as they include a major expansion of Maryland and Virginia's express toll lane networks. Hot lanes are a sound, simple, and proven way to fund needed investments by those who benefit directly from them, while maintaining free travel options for everyone. Your long-range plan includes 2 major projects, the American Legion Bridge and I-270, and the South Side Beltway study our organization strongly supports, that will not only ease congestion and add new transit services, they will also more than pay for themselves over time and create ongoing revenues to support transit and other needs in a way that is consistent with increased EV use. As important as speeding the transition to EVs is for our environment, making sure we have the funds to invest in all transportation modes is equally important to our economy and our quality of life for this region. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Next up, Jason Stanford.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to comment today. I am here today to reiterate the Northern Virginia business community's strong support for the completion of our region's express lanes network. This network was approved by the TPB as one of our community's aspirational goals in 2018. And the TPB's own analysis showed that this network would increase travel on reliable transportation modes by 42%. By far the largest of any goal evaluated, and reduce daily vehicle hours of delay by 11% across our entire region, the largest of any transportation upgrade. In addition, this network increases the region-wide number of jobs accessible via transit by 2% and via automobile by 5%. The 2022 update of the Visualize 2045 plan actually saw a dramatic loss in the number of jobs accessible via automobile in the eastern part of our region, including Prince George's County. The only major difference between the 2018 and 2022 Visualize 2045 plans was the removal of a segment of Maryland's planned express lanes. Furthermore, the TPB's 2022 State of the Commute Survey showed that the vast majority of households in our region with incomes under $60,000 relied on automobiles to get to work, nearly a 4-to-1 margin compared to transit. Failing to move forward with the regional express lanes network, including the Southside Express Lanes project, will only further reduce the number of jobs accessible to low-income residents in equity emphasis areas across the DC area. If we truly value equity and expanding access to jobs and opportunities, the express lanes represent one of the best tools to achieve that goal. These lanes are essentially bus rapid transit networks that free up space for existing free lanes, is built using private funding so that we can free up public dollars for other transportation priorities, and is paid for over the life of the asset by the users of the lanes. Therefore, I urge you to continue to complete the regional express lanes network as envisioned and improved by the Transportation Planning Board in 2018. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to comments online. Lynn?
Great. Thanks, Chair Henderson. Between noon Tuesday, July 16th and noon Tuesday, September 17th, the TPB received 3 letters and 1 comment submitted via email. A summary as well as each comment can be found on our meeting webpage. I'll briefly summarize the comments now. Tad Aburn provided a copy of a July letter he submitted to the Climate, Energy, and Environmental Policy Committee, which requests that the committee act on recommendations they received from the Air and Climate Public Advisory Committee. The letter says that the TPB is updating a transportation sector greenhouse gas emission reduction plan and that the plan is based on outdated and weak regional goals, which he says means the TPB is ignoring more difficult transportation strategies. Barbara Sofel writes on behalf of the Citizens Against Beltway Expansion to urge the TPB to insist on a third modeling scenario alternative to the Southside Beltway expansion in the Visualize 2050 plan. They urge that the third scenario include WMATA's plans to extend the Blue Line over the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, as well as supplemental transit, bike and walk projects, expanded travel demand, and transit-oriented land use. Bill Pugh from the Coalition for Smarter Growth writes that an alternative regional transportation and land use scenario was a key component of the board's 2021 resolution that directed the Visualize 2050 process to consider multiple build scenarios and their impact on the region's greenhouse gas and other targets. At this point, he says the Visualize 2050 process will only devote resources to modeling an additional option to serve VDOT's 495 Southside Express Lanes project. A third scenario, a constrained plan prioritizing transit and bike ped improvements combined with transit-oriented land use and travel demand management using the regional air conformity model, would be groundbreaking and invaluable work for regional decision-making. Today, the Coalition for Smarter Growth asks you again to include this alternate scenario in the Visualize 2050 process and fulfill the board's resolution R19-2021. They have attached a draft resolution to assist in this effort, and he thanks us for our work. Lastly, Marjorie Dunn submitted a form letter used by the email campaigns launched earlier this year, which included content urging the TPB board to reject the currently proposed I-495 Express Lanes project. As I mentioned, all the comments are found on our meeting page. That concludes my report. Thank you, Chair Henderson.
Thank you. We now will move to the approval of the July 17th minutes. We've been provided a written summary of these. I move that we adopt the minutes of the July 17th, 2024 meeting as provided. May I please have a second to the motion?
Second.
Oh, okay. Who said that?
I did.
Okay. All right. Thank you, James from Virginia. And now for the vote. Are there any nays or abstentions? I'll go based on jurisdiction. Oh, sorry. I'm supposed to ask, are there any corrections to the meeting minutes? Okay. Are there any nays or abstentions from the District of Columbia? From Maryland? From Virginia? Any of the other agencies? Okay, the minutes are adopted. We'll now move on to the technical committee report. We have a written summary of their September 6th meeting. Amy Gabarini, who's the chair of the committee, if you could please summarize that report for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. The technical committee met Friday, September 6th, and received briefings on 3 items that were reviewed for inclusion on today's TPB agenda. Those briefings included a presentation on TPB's equity deep dive study, an analysis of transportation inequities in disadvantaged communities. There was good discussion following the presentation, including questions on how the study's results would be used and recommendations for additional considerations. TPB Tech was also briefed on the Regional Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Implementation, or REVI for short, strategy, which is a guide to help state and local jurisdictions in the region plan for deploying EV charging infrastructure. Lastly, there was a briefing on the proposed safety summit to highlight regional concerns around roadway fatalities and serious injury trends. That summit is proposed for the fall, but a date hasn't been formalized yet. And then there were 2 items presented for information and discussion only, including a progress report on Visualize 2050, the FY26 and 29 TIP inputs, and Project Info Track 2.0. And then lastly, a presentation from DDOT on the design and construction of the H Street Northwest Bridge Replacement Project. So that concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Are there any questions for Amy regarding the technical committee report? All right, thanks, Amy. We now move on to the Community Advisory Committee report, as well as the Access for All Committee report. I'll start with the CAC. We have a written summary of their September 12th meeting. I will turn to Ra Amin, who's the chair of the CAC. Ra, are there any aspect of the CAC activities you want to highlight for us today?
Yes, I'll share some highlights. Good afternoon, TPB members. Thank you, Chair Henderson. The meeting featured a discussion of DMV moves, a presentation and discussion of TPB's climate change mitigation planning program, a Act Locally round robin, a updated status on the Access for All committee. Here are a few highlights. I shared an update on DMV moves. Members provided feedback on the potential recommendations going to the task force on a regional fare policy framework, regional fleet and stop design guidelines, and regional transit funding. I provided these comments to the DMV moves leadership at the CPAG meeting the next day. The CAC appreciated the presentation on the plans to reduce regional greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector. The recap of the climate change mitigation study gives us an understanding of how difficult achieving our regional goals will be. We also learned about the programs the TPB will be considering to advance reductions through the regional electric vehicle strategy. Lastly, we now set aside a time for an agenda item for the membership to report on their community engagement activities, a Act Locally round robin. From work on local planning advisory boards, spreading the word about Montgomery County's ride-on bus improvements, active transportation in PG County, and raising the issue of construction during rush hour to the District of Columbia elected officials. Our members are active citizens. I invite the TPB members to read the CAC report for more details about our discussion. This concludes my report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rob. Does anyone have any questions? Takis?
Madam Chair, thank you so much for all this work. I have one question. Maybe this is not best placed with you. Maybe some other staff can answer that. So the feedback to DMV moves that comes now from our community engagement committee, how is that processed, and how can the broader community see what the committee is already touching on, so that they calibrate their input in the process as well?
Yes, thank you for the question. I'm going to attempt to give you an answer, but I'm also going to invite staff to help me out with that answer. So once the package is received, I, along with staff, we go through that package and we prepare it for the prepared for the CAC. We get through as much as possible in the allotted time that we have. A written summary is taken from there and given through the staff, given back to me to process, to prepare, to express the concerns, the questions of the CAC. And I'm going to ask staff to jump in and assist if I
Sure.
missed anything out here.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Ra. Thank you, Mr. Carantonis. So with the DMV moves, as members know, that's a joint initiative between the COG board and the WMATA board. And the TPB is partnering with both of them in assisting, providing some technical assistance to this effort. The way the DMV moves activities are proceeding is there is an task force of elected officials from around the region, Maryland, Virginia, and DC. And the task force has stood up two advisory groups, one of government partners, which includes all of the 24 member jurisdictions, representatives from the state administrations and what have you, and another advisory group of community partners. And the TPB's Community Advisory Committee is on that. And as the chair of the CAC, Ra Amin attends those meetings. All of the two advisory groups are tasked with specific tasks by the task force of the DMV moves. One of the earliest tasks they gave was to examine how the 13 different transit operators in the region, what are all the things that they could do to coordinate their transit service design and delivery, to provide a seamless transit experience for the residents and visitors of this region, to explore all the different ways in which there could be cost efficiencies gained by working together. So over the past 3 months, the advisory groups have been discussing these issues. In the most recent meeting, which was last week, as Ross said, the advisory groups have coalesced around a set of recommendations that they are now going to present. The advisory group chairs are going to present those recommendations to the task force at the task force's meeting next Monday. So it'll be up to the task force to see what they make of those recommendations. We would assume that all of the recommendations that the task force decides to accept and adopt, they might turn around and advise their own transit agencies and the DMV moves staff to say, okay, develop detailed implementation plans and a schedule for it. What is coming up next is after we decide on how the different transit operators in the region can coordinate, to then address what are the unmet funding needs of all of the transit operators in this region. Of course, WMATA is the largest, but of all of the transit operators in the region, to quantify that financial need and then to explore what are the ways in which we can generate additional revenue that is both sustainable and predictable, and then take that to the task force back again to say, here are some options. Which ones of these should we be pursuing in more detailed analysis? And then concluding with the region's collective leadership committing to, yes, we are going to work together across the 3 states and the 24 different jurisdictions to raise this new funding. So all of the recommendations that go to the task force are coming up from the advisory groups, and input from the TPB CAC is part of those discussions, is how all of the inputs are being treated by the advisory group chair.
Thank you. That answers my question. Of course, what I always want to say, and the reason why I'm asking is, I cannot overstate the importance of highlighting the public input in the process because, you know, sometimes I have the impression that people think that this is, the work of a bunch of technocrats, administrators, and elected officials. Very, very, very very top, a little bit lopsided, but there is huge and consistent public interest in that, especially from communities that have never been asked to participate in this. And now they have a viable way to do that. So this is why I'm interested to know how this is processed and how this goes. So I will wait until next Monday to see how it's digested by the task force, and we will be observing the process.
Yes, yeah, I agree. Especially the community advisory group has more than 40 members, and each member is representing either an organization that in turn is representing multiple people. There are chambers of commerce, there are labor union representatives. It's a broad spectrum. There are the WMATA Transit Riders Advisory Group representatives are there. So I think the DMV Moves has tried to make that community advisory group as broad as possible to get all voices. And they are the ones who are developing the recommendations to take to the task force. This is not as much a staff-led as much as the collective work of these two advisory groups.
Okay, we're going to go on to our Vice Chair, James Walkinshaw, who facilitated the Access for All Advisory Committee meeting earlier this month.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Ra always does such a great job summarizing the CAC meetings that I feel a little nervous now following that. But the Access for All Advisory Committee met virtually on Monday, September 9th. We received updates on DMV moves, a preview of the fall's TPB agenda, including today's agenda, and an update on our ongoing Access for All Advisory Committee member assessment. We're engaging with the members of the committee in preparation for a planned refresh of the committee structure that we'll learn more about later this fall. We also received a presentation on transportation access and better health outcomes. A couple of items that I did just want to highlight. We had a report from our WMATA Access Advisory Committee liaisons, and we discussed, again, the Better Bus redesign and the importance of remaining vigilant and engaged to ensure that there aren't unintended consequences related to Metro Access users that might come about as a result of that Better Bus redesign. We heard some concerns about seniors being able to access smart trip cards physically inside metro stations that WMATA agreed to follow up on. And finally, we had two really great presentations on transportation access and the connection to better health outcomes. We heard from Jessica Richards from the Tri-County Council of Southern Maryland and Jeb Corey from IT Curves Transit Group, who each presented their respective programs which provide access to medical care. And we learned that approximately 3.6 million Americans and thousands of people in our region miss medical care and appointments due to transportation barriers. And some of the programs we heard about from our presenters are helping overcome those barriers and address that issue. So it was really powerful presentations that we'd be happy to share and are on the website if members are interested. We wrapped up with our AFA forum where all of our members have the opportunity to share updates, and Fairfax County shared some updates about our ongoing work around our enhanced mobility grants and some transportation outreach that we've been doing at senior centers in the county. So thank you, Madam Chair. That is the AFA committee update.
Thanks, James. Does anyone have any questions regarding the AFA report? Okay. All right, so we'll move to the steering committee actions and report. We have a copy of Director Conti's written report. Conti, is there anything you want to highlight for us?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. I'll just do a quick overview of the contents of the memo and then add a couple of items of interest that is not in the memo. The TPB Steering Committee met on September 6th, and it approved several TPB amendments, TIP amendments, and it also amended the TPB's work program and budget for the fiscal year that we are currently in. Speaking to the amendment to the TPB's work program and budget due to an error in the cost calculations for the various work program activities in the budget that the board approved in March, the budget had to be amended by moving about $250,000 from the research and data program activity to the long-range planning activity. This does not change any of the planned work activities, more of under which program was the funding listed. Details are on pages 5 through 10. Similarly, the TPB's Commuter Connections work program was also amended, but this one was to add about $942,000 in new funding from Maryland Department of Transportation to have the Commuter Connections expand its current commuter incentive program to the residents of the Baltimore area who are currently inconvenienced due to the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. So details of that are on pages 11 through 16. The committee also added about $386,000 in additional federal transportation alternatives program funds to the town of Vienna's Locust Street Trail Improvement Project. This additional funding was needed by the project to complete construction. The project had previously received transportation alternative program funds that were approved by the TPB. Virginia Department of Transportation had informed that there was some underruns or unallocated funding that would be available, so we were glad to provide that funding to the town of Vienna's project. The TIP amendments, there were 4 of these, and there was about $8 million in state transportation block group grants funding that was added to the Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast Great Streets project in Washington, D.C. Similarly, about $13 million in total for 3 different projects were added in Maryland, including access improvements to the Mark College Park Station, to the Beaver Branch Bridge replacement, and to the overall bridge preliminary engineering program in Montgomery County. Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation also added about $15 million in congestion mitigation, air quality, and regional surface transportation program funds to a new commuter assistance program in Arlington. And it added about $60 million in FTA's low or no emission program funds for Fairfax County to purchase about 60 electric buses in Fairfax County. Finally, the Federal Highways Eastern Federal Lands Division requested updating the funding information for all of the federal projects that are in the District, Maryland, and Virginia to reflect the latest appropriations. And the details of those projects in the 3 jurisdictions are on pages 56 through 60. Now, turning to the letter sent and received, on page 62 is a copy of a letter from the Federal Highway Division Administrator, Mr. Williams, commending the TPB for the systemic approach it took to stakeholder engagement, to evaluating the climate risks to transportation infrastructure across different modes, and on the TPB's plan to incorporate this regional resiliency program into the Visualized 2050 long-range transportation plan. Also, we have letters of support from the TPB to its members applying for federal community charging and fueling program grants. And this is to implement or install EV charging infrastructure. There's a letter of support going to Arlington County, another letter of support going to the District of Columbia, and then another one to the Council of Governments, where a number of TPB localities have pooled together to apply for this federal grant. And those include the cities of Alexandria, City of Fairfax, City of Manassas, Arlington County, Fairfax County, and Frederick County and Prince George's County. We are very glad to see this level of activity seeking federal funds for EV infrastructure. On the TPB's agenda item today under 7, you will be briefed on the latest document, which is a resource document that the TPB has developed, which in essence is the blueprint for where EV chargers are needed in this region to facilitate the mass adoption of EV vehicles in our region. Moving to the announcement section, you have in your packet a flyer announcing the 50th anniversary of TPB's Commuter Connections program. That is on October 2nd, 2024, and it will be in the National Press Club in the District of Columbia. We anticipate the mayor of the district providing the keynote. Senior officials of the DOTs are expected as well. The contributions of commuter connections in reducing congestion, reducing emissions, increasing carpooling, van pooling, and transit ridership is truly significant on a daily basis. And certainly over the past 50 years, it has had a significant impact. I hope that members will be able to attend and participate in that event. And that covers my written report. A couple of announcements not in my report. The Community Advisory Committee, the staff will be soliciting membership for appointment of a new two-year term to this committee. We will start our efforts next month. We will be accepting applications from October 4th through November 18th. Our goal is to get applications representing the region's racial and ethnic diversity, as well as different perspectives on transportation. We would also like to get applications from TPB member jurisdictions who have not recently participated in the process. So please be on the lookout. We will be reaching out to you personally to get your assistance in finding community leaders who can participate in the TPB's advisory committee. You should be looking for an email from Laura Backel, your staff. And then on August 2nd, since the TPB last met in July, staff held a curbside management forum. We hosted a similar forum on curbside management, but with focus on freight movement back in 2017. And then we held another forum in 2020. So we figured that this would be another time where the demand for curb space has increased significantly due to vehicular deliveries, pedestrians, transit riders, micromobility, and the plans and implementation of bus rapid transit systems. So about 50 participants and from 20 different organizations participated in person, and an additional 20 people participated online. The last item, we talked about it a little bit during Ra's report on DMV moves. I have briefed the board previously about the joint COG-WMATA initiative. Since the TPB met in July, work has continued. We continue to support the work of DMV Moves Task Force and the advisory groups. The task force will be meeting next Monday, as I mentioned earlier, at the WMATA office building in New Carrollton. The task force meeting agenda will include discussions and recommendations of the advisory groups on how best to integrate the transit activities across the region, and also a preliminary assessment on the future transit funding needs and revenue options. I will be happy to answer any questions on this or other matters, and I will definitely be able to bring back the materials from the DMV Moves Task Force to this board in October. That concludes my report, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Kanti. Does anyone have any questions for Kanti? You said there is a question online?
Yeah, Mr. Snyder.
Mr. Snyder?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And to Kanti, thanks for a huge amount of work in so many different areas, you and your staff. It's amazing how much work you're doing. I did have a follow-up. We received a letter from the Coalition of Smarter Growth about another scenario regarding perhaps more robust scenario in terms of meeting greenhouse gas goals. And I'm wondering what thoughts you had about that, and whether we should set up a meeting with them to better understand what it is that they're asking for, or just whatever comments you had on that would be appreciated.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Snyder. So I'm happy to, I'll definitely provide this board with an informational memo ahead of the next meeting on what the suggestion is, and what some of the issues that go into pursuing any of those suggestions. There are and I'm definitely happy to meet with the public, with Coalition for Smarter Growth, to help them understand what the process requirements are, and what work has been done that might be able to provide the information that they're seeking here at the regional level. I'll definitely be able to do that. I think right now, the one thing I would note is even in the public comment, there is a reference to what the TPB is currently doing as a scenario analysis. That is one thing that I would like to clarify. Currently, the TPB has authorized staff to conduct air quality conformity analysis on 2 sets of projects. The 2 sets of projects are vastly similar, with one change. In one set of projects, the Virginia Southside Express Lanes Mobility Project is not included. But it is important to note that it is not a scenario. The TPB had been asked to make a decision on what projects it would include in the next round of the long-range plan. There was considerable discussion. At the end of those discussions, for a period of 2 months, the board concluded that it would benefit from having additional time to decide on whether the proposed Southside Express Lanes project would indeed be added to the next update. So it is not a scenario analysis. It is just an additional option for TPB to take action on. So that is one difference. I know it is probably a little bit in the weeds, but because the conformity analysis and the long-range plan is to be adopted per federal regulations, it does not lend itself for a scenario analysis per se. But I'll be happy to provide a little more information, and certainly be happy to meet with any and all groups to help them understand what the technical issues and considerations are.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. I turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Snyder. Any other questions? Okay. We'll go to the chairman's remarks. For my remarks for this month, I just want to highlight a couple of upcoming events and things. The first would be September 23rd. It is Car-Free Day. Car-Free Day in the region. If you guys remember earlier this summer, we did a resolution on Car-Free Day. That's a Monday. I know Mondays are tough, but I think for all of the board members, if we can set the example, I'll be with Conti out in New Carrollton. So I'll be trucking along on the Orange Line out to New Carrollton. And so as much as you all can promote this over the next few days on your social media and otherwise to your constituencies, we would really like to get a good participation this year for the Car-Free Day. There are 2 other upcoming events in October I also want to highlight. So October 2nd is the 50th anniversary of Commuter Connections. If you guys recall, Commuter Connections contribution is basically trying to get to reducing single occupant vehicles, increase carpool van van pool, transit, ridership, walking, and biking. We've had such a meaningful impact on our clean air, reducing congestions, increasing safety, and making the commute more affordable. So this is the 50th anniversary this year. It's both a celebration as well as a rededication to the efforts, especially post-pandemic, and to enhance it. And so there is a Commuter Connections event that will take place, and as well as an award ceremony where we honor organizations who have done really good work on this. Second, I want to highlight our October 31st safety event, which is intended to shed a spotlight on the seriousness of the issue. I think many of our jurisdictions, as well as the region, adopted a Vision Zero goal. And frankly, if we look at the data, we have seen unacceptable level of fatalities and serious injury crashes on our roadways. And so I think it's important for the TPB to discuss how it, as a regional planning body, can help states and local transportation agencies change the current state of the outcomes as quickly as possible. So I urge each of you as elected officials and decision makers within your jurisdictions to please attend the event. The information I think has gone out and will continue to circulate it. And then also participate in the conversation and the brainstorming on the best role that TPP can play around actually making Vision Zero a true goal for our region. And with that, that's all I have. We'll move to item 7 on our agenda, which is the Regional Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Implementation Strategy. We're going to review this. We're going to start with our staff, Duskin Vukasin. Did I say that right? I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's Dushan Vuksan.
Dushan. Okay. He's going to get us started to look at the latest work product of the TPB, which is a plan for the region to build up electric vehicle charging infrastructure. As someone who has an electric vehicle, this is a super important conversation. We have adopted some very aggressive goals in terms of reducing greenhouse gases from our vehicles. Electric vehicles is part of that strategy. It's not the whole strategy, it's part of that strategy. And if we're going to start converting the vehicle fleet, we are going to need a robust network of charging stations that actually make sense for our region so that we're not putting charging stations essentially on top of one another. So, Duskin, take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I wanted to give big thanks to Aaron Morrow, who was on the agenda and who led the TPB COG staff and worked very closely with our consultant on this study. But Aaron was unfortunately unable to be here today, but we all very much appreciate her efforts and work that she has put in development of the Regional Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Implementation Strategy. REVI for short. This is a mouthful. Next slide, please. So first of all, I'm going to start by talking about why we developed the Regional Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Implementation Strategy. The TPB's Climate Change Mitigation Study of 2021, or CCMS, here's another acronym, found that transitioning vehicles from fossil fuels to clean fuels is the action with highest potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the on-road transportation sector and help the region achieve its greenhouse gas reduction goals. The region currently has almost 4 million light-duty vehicles. The performance analysis of Visualize 2045 showed that even with increases in transit trips, transit accessibility, and bicycling and walking, future travel in this region is still expected to be largely by auto modes. Second, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law 2021 established a $7.5 billion program within the U.S. Department of Transportation to fund the development and installation of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. There's the $5 billion National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, NEVI, formula program, and the $2.5 billion Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Discretionary Grant Program, or the CFI program. Having a regional vehicle infrastructure strategy could benefit the region in planning and especially in applying for federal funds. As noted earlier, COG was recently awarded a $3.9 million from the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Program, and COG used the REVI strategy to develop a recently submitted regional application for the next round of funding. Next slide, please. The strategy was developed by ICF, our consultant, and overseen by the Regional Electric Vehicle Deployment Working Group, which made it a joint effort between TPB and COG. This work was funded through the TPB's Unified Planning Work Program, and we appreciate the support from the state DOTs. The REVI strategy is intended to serve as planning resource to assist the region in developing a network of publicly accessible EV charging stations. The emphasis here should be on the word resource, and it's one of the resources. It is not meant to be prescriptive. Jurisdictions may use this study in conjunction with local knowledge to determine the best path forward for deploying EV charging stations. Next slide, please. The REVI strategy builds on regional planning goals and includes 3 key objectives: to identify locations for publicly accessible EV charging facilities to support increased EV adoption throughout the metropolitan Washington region, to support reliable access to publicly accessible EV charging infrastructure, particularly in the areas with limited at-home charging, including multifamily housing developments and disadvantaged communities, and to help ensure that all populations in the metropolitan Washington region, including disadvantaged communities and individuals living within equity emphasis areas, are able to access and benefit from the financial and environmental benefits of electric vehicles. Shifting the region's vehicle fleet to clean fuels is often discussed as a long-term strategy for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But to make that long-term strategy happen, supportive actions like installing a network of publicly accessible EV charging stations should be taken now. Currently, less than 3% of light-duty vehicles in the region are EVs, which is a small but a rapidly growing share. Just to think that this share was at 0 or so about 10 to 15 years ago, it's pretty astounding, actually. The average age of a light-duty vehicle is over 9 years. Therefore, people purchasing vehicles today could well be driving them beyond 2030. Knowing that they have access to reliable, publicly accessible EV charging could make the difference in the vehicle they choose to drive for the next decade, and these actions could result in increasing that percentage from slightly below 3% to a much higher percentage that would help us meet the greenhouse gas reduction goals. I will turn this presentation over to Ms. Haley Erickson of ICF, who put in a lot of work here as well. Haley, take it over, please.
Thanks, Dushan. All right, next slide, please. Okay. So the REVI strategy has 2 main components. First, EV registration projections that are used to anticipate future charging needs. And second, a charging station location priority map to support the development of a comprehensive charging network across the region by identifying specific potential sites for EV charging stations. For the first component, we calculated light-duty electric vehicle registration projections for 2030, 2035, and 2045 by jurisdiction and region. For those calculations, we analyzed 3 different adoption scenarios: low, medium, and high. And the goal of this project component is to estimate the approximate number of EV charging stations that the region will need in order to meet future charging demand based on the expected EV population. The second component of the analysis is the development of a light-duty EV charging station deployment map that highlights certain parcels of land as optimal locations for EV charging stations. This component also analyzed 3 different scenarios. The goal of the map is to help jurisdictions identify and prioritize locations for light-duty EV charging station installations. These analyses have been turned into a strategy document that is now available on COG's website. Next slide. All right, as I mentioned, we calculated light duty EV registration projections for low, medium, and high adoption scenarios for both jurisdictions in the region. The results of those projections are visualized on this slide. The low scenario is tied to historic EV registration numbers and serves as a conservative estimate, assuming that adoption will continue at current rates. The low projection shows that the region could see a 5-fold growth in light duty EVs by 2030 and a 12-fold growth by 2035. The low projection is data driven and could reasonably be expected to happen. However, if the region does not invest in publicly accessible EV charging, it may not happen because potential buyers may recognize a lack of public infrastructure and be reluctant to make the investment due to range anxiety as well as a variety of other concerns. The medium scenario is an average of the high and low adoption scenarios, and the high scenario is based on jurisdictions achieving their most aspirational goals, which equates to meeting Advanced Clean Cars 2 goals. The high scenario shows a potential growth of 11-fold by 2030 and 25-fold growth by 2035. Next slide. So as of January 1st of this year, the region had just over 82,000 EV registrations, 3,900 level 2 EV charging station ports, and 385 direct current fast charger ports. The EV registration forecast shows substantial growth in EV adoption for the region, which will merit a significant expansion of publicly accessible EV charging station to support those drivers and vehicles. So to just meet the low scenario charging needs, the region would need to add 3.2 times the number of charging points that are currently available by 2030, which equates to adding approximately 10,000 more level 2 EV charging ports and 100 DC fast charging ports. By 2035, the region would need to add 7 times the number of ports to meet that charging demand as well. For the high adoption scenario, the region would need to deploy 7 times the number of charging points just by 2030 and 14 times the number of charging ports by 2035, which equates to the region needing to deploy over 55,000 charging ports in the next 6 years. Next slide. Region's light duty EV projections and public EV charging station needs that I discussed on the previous slides. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the second component of the REVI strategy is a light duty EV charging station deployment location recommendation map. To develop the map of potential priority sites, we used data from several sources to determine locations with anticipated high demand for EV charging stations, as well as EV charging deserts within equity emphasis areas. So our approach is heavily driven by traffic levels, but incorporates additional data related to site characteristics, including locations of existing chargers, multifamily housing developments, equity emphasis areas, highway on and off ramps, park and ride locations, and different land use types for EV charger installations. All right, next slide. For the charging station locations map, we analyzed 3 different scenarios that each emphasize slightly different factors and subsequently produced 3 separate maps for jurisdictions to use depending on their individual priorities for EV charging station deployment. Scenario A looks at prioritizing DC fast chargers with high utilization. DC fast chargers currently give about 80 miles per range per 20 minutes of charging and are best suited for locations where drivers will dwell for a short period of time, like a rest station, fast service restaurant, etc. The goal of scenario A is to simply build out direct current fast chargers to serve as many drivers as possible, as quickly as possible. Scenario B looks at prioritizing level 2 chargers with an equity focus. Typically, level 2 chargers give 10 to 20 miles of range per hour and are more suitable for residential or workplace locations where drivers will dwell and charge for at least 4 hours. And scenario C looks at prioritizing direct current fast chargers more with a multifamily housing focus. Next slide. Because we had 3 different scenarios, our analysis produced 3 parcel level maps, 1 for each scenario analyzed. So the maps display parcels of land that are scored for EV charging station deployment suitability based on traffic levels and the different site characteristics that I mentioned earlier. As you can see in the images on the slide, the highest priority for deployment are red, and the lowest priority parcels for deployment are blue. Generally, high traffic areas will have a higher priority score. We want to build chargers where people are already going before moving to less busy areas. Once the region's charging network is more developed, traffic levels may not need to play as significant of a role in deployment planning. So for example, a particular parcel's score will increase in priority if it experiences high traffic and is located near a park and ride location, multifamily housing, equity emphasis area, or highway ramps. Alternatively, a parcel's score will decrease if it's already close to existing charging stations or is in an area that experiences low traffic. Next slide. All right, so within the Revvy strategy document, you'll find the following sections: executive summary, background and context, which goes over kind of a state of the market, state of the region for both EV adoption and EV charging stations. We've got a section dedicated to using the EV charging station siting analysis, or the MAPs, which will go over how to use the Revvy strategy, what the technical approach was for developing those maps, and then limitations and considerations to keep in mind when you're actually using the map for your deployment planning purposes. We've also got the regional results of our analysis and 10 jurisdictional profiles that look at the details of jurisdictional results more closely. And then we've got appendices that dive deeper into the methodology used in this report. So let's take a look at what one of those jurisdictional profiles look like. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the strategy contains 10 jurisdictional profiles. The first page of each profile looks like the image on the left. You've got quick registrations and charging infrastructure, and on the right you have information on their EV and charging infrastructure deployment progress, their EV registration projections, and trends in EV adoption. Each profile also has their individual projected EV charging port needs broken down by adoption scenario, planning year, and charging level. Next slide. Profiles also contain a high-level screenshot of their EV charger priority deployment locations map, and then they all highlight 5 potential deployment sites with an image and a short description. The image on the right is an example of what one of those recommendations looks like. Next slide. All right, so the Revvy strategy document and map can serve as a resource for and aid jurisdictions in EV infrastructure deployment planning. Like Dushan mentioned, the Revvy strategy is not meant to be prescriptive. Jurisdictions should use the study in conjunction with local knowledge to determine the best path forward for deploying EV charging stations. The number of charging stations deployed and at which locations is entirely up to each jurisdiction. But jurisdictions can use the map at any stage of their planning process. For example, at the start, by using the map to just generally identify priority locations to help focus their planning efforts. They can use it to cross-check against locations they've already flagged as high interest areas for deployment, or they can select high priority parcels for in-depth charging station siting assessments, like evaluating electrical capacity and pre-wiring that exists at the site. All right, next slide. The Revy strategy and document are published and may be found at the links on this slide. Next slide. And unless my TPB colleagues have anything to add, we can turn it over for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation, Haley and Dusan. Does anyone have any questions? I'll start to let you all think about your questions, perhaps. So this is great information that is included in the report. I'm curious how we're working with each jurisdiction to map this all out, because it didn't seem, at least from the example of the profile that you included in your slides, that we're making suggestions about where specifically a charging location would be more viable.
Yes, I can, Kanti, I can answer that. The purpose of developing those jurisdictional profile was exactly to help in the local planning process. So one example I would cite is we noted that about 2 weeks ago, we got informed by the federal agencies that a COG application on behalf of a number of our jurisdictions for a federal grant, we had won our grant for $3.9 million. So there were about 4 jurisdictions or so who had participated in that effort. Now we are submitting a second round of application for federal grants, and there are more jurisdictions participating. In both of them, this level of analysis was informing their decisions, because in those grant applications, they had to say, this is the amount of funding we are requesting so that we can install this type of charging at this location. So that level of specificity helped, we believe, help make the grant more compelling.
Absolutely. We
so-
like details.
Yeah.
What were the do you know who the 4 jurisdictions were for that first round of the 3.9?
I will get back to you. I know the ones that are on the second one. I've forgotten who the ones were on the first round.
Okay.
So we had to, it was interesting. It was 2 days before the second round of application was due that we heard that we had won. So we had to immediately edit our application to make sure that those locations that were in the previous application are not repeated here.
Right.
So we are kind of making progress with this. The one thing I would note, though, the reason we are not, this report is not leaning heavily on saying this is the exact parcel in which you should prioritize installing a charging station, is because of the methodology that we have used, which is at a regional scale. It is very good in pointing us to a census block level. Sometimes the parcel that is identified either with a red colored code or a blue colored code, it needs to be verified with local jurisdictions just because of how the methodology is. So that is why the report shies away from saying this is the exact location, but we are saying this is the general area where we believe you are going to need publicly accessible charging.
Great, thank you. Next.
Thank you so much, and really appreciate the work. A couple of questions, just sort of mapping this on to the work that the state jurisdictions, including the district, are doing in the NEVI program, and just our sort of overall regional strategy, because I do think this is something TPB wants to keep eyes on how we're being successful on deployment. So how does, in terms of our goal, how does what each of the jurisdictions are currently doing on NEVI in terms of, I know we just announced our first round, which we sort of made around 1A because we have some more work to do to meet our AFC corridors. How does sort of what has happened on NEVI inform our progress and the work that you've done here? And then I'll have a couple of follow-up questions.
That's a good question. This report is just being completed, so we have not had the time to reconcile it with the stations or with what is in the Navy, the statewide Navy documents. It does reflect, or it has accounted for those that are already on ground, but those that are proposed is that's a reconciliation that we have to do. That said, to me, the sobering thing is even under a low adoption of EV vehicles, this analysis is indicating that we would need 10,000 publicly accessible charging stations in the next 5 years, right? And we would need about 25,000 in the next 10 years. And that is under a low adoption. The TPB's greenhouse gas reduction goal, for example, is to reduce greenhouse gases from vehicles 50% below 2005 levels by 2030. That we are not going to get through a low adoption. So if you look at high adoption, and there are a number of interventions that may need to happen to get the region to become a high adopter. But assuming all of that happens, then the number of charging station changes. We will need to build 25,000 in the next 5 years. So I think that is one of the key takeaways for me, and your suggestion is a good one. We will reconcile it with what the Navy plans are, and will they get us into the low, medium, high scenario?
Sure, because I think a great outcome here is with what we're doing at the state level and our state partners are doing. What we know, each of the local jurisdictions are pretty aggressive in trying to pursue the same goal. They're also going after CFI grants. I think if we can map out what the pipeline is and what with the known pipeline versus where these gaps are that we haven't, even aren't filling with applications we have out there that we might not win, that can give us collectively a roadmap as well. So appreciate how that work could advance.
Thank you.
Oh, we've got multiple. All right, we'll start with Councilmember Furman.
Thank you very much, Chair Henderson, and thank you very much for this presentation. I represent Upper Northwest DC, and I took a quick look at the map and I see not a lot of suggestion for a lot of new charging stations in Upper Northwest, and yet there's a lot of EV vehicles in Upper Northwest DC. One question is the concept that folks will be charging their vehicles at home, and so then you want another place where they can charge it at their destination? Is that part of the explanation for why there's not, even though there may be a lot of EV vehicles, there's not a lot of suggested charging stations? And then the other side of that is downtown looks bright red, high demand for charging stations. To what extent are you taking into account the desire by the district to have more people come to downtown using public transportation as opposed to cars? How does that figure into the analysis that you've done?
Gotcha. I'll take a crack at it, and then I'm glad Haley is online to correct all the things I might not get right. So on your first part of the question, the analysis as the methodology that we used was if there's a tract of land with predominantly multifamily housing, the assumption is that is a less optimal place to put a publicly accessible charger. This entire analysis is publicly accessible charger, right? That doesn't mean a tract of land with majority single family homes would never be identified at all. It would be, but what would be identified before that is a tract of land where you had multifamily housing, where in-house charging equipment is hard to access. So that is one part of why you might see that in Northwest Washington, DC. In terms of the ability of the methodology to account for prevailing or the aspirational modal splits of any jurisdiction, the methodology uses the prevailing and the projected traffic flow, traffic volumes through any region, right? So where is the demand for these vehicles coming in? And it is based on that. So it is very likely that what we see within the downtown District of Columbia area is reflecting the traffic that is still projected to come in above and beyond what is already being coming to DC on public transportation. Now, the methodology is built in a manner where you can revise these projections as needed, where if there are actions taken where the traffic volumes, the future traffic projections could be meaningfully changed from what it is forecast to be today, then the locations and the numbers will automatically change as well.
Tagus. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Vice Chair Walkinshaw.
Sure, thank you. This is really fascinating work, so thank you all for the work and for the presentation. And I'll preface this by saying I have a little bit of a contrarian view on this topic. And I have been an EV driver in our region in Northern Virginia for 15 years. And I could promise you 15 years ago, there really was a lack of public charging infrastructure. But also, I could count literally on one hand the number of times in 15 years that I have needed to use public EV charging. Now, that obviously comes from a position of certain privilege in that I have lived in a single family home for those 15 years. But to your point, Mr. Frum, I suspect maybe in your district, there's a number of single family homes as well. And unless you're taking a long road trip, if you live in a single family home, you have the EV charging infrastructure that you need. And I fear sometimes when we talk about this issue, we are talking our constituents out of transitioning to EVs. In Fairfax County, there are, of the 1.1 million people in the county, about 600,000 of those people live in single family homes. Every one of those homes has at least the components of the EV charging infrastructure that they need to get around this region. Now, taking a road trip 500 miles to visit grandma, that's a different scenario and different story. So I think it's really important when we talk about this that there's obviously different categories of folks and different housing types with different challenges, but there is not a lack of EV charging infrastructure for the majority of the region. Almost everybody in Prince William County lives in a single family home. Almost everybody in Loudoun County lives in a single family home. They have the infrastructure that they need if they want to make that transition to EVs. Now, obviously for folks in attached housing or multifamily housing, it's a different challenge, which I think is for the most part what this work is focused on. And I did want to ask one specific question, and I really appreciate the jurisdiction by jurisdiction reports here, and I'm just looking at Fairfax counties, and one of the locations you identified for the level 2 charging targeted to equity emphasis areas is the Backlick Plaza Shopping Center, which is across the street from the Braddock district that I represent. And I represent, I think, probably the folks who make it an equity emphasis area. And I'm trying to understand for them who live in the apartments across the street, low to moderate income community, obviously no EV charging infrastructure inside their apartment complex. And the owner of that complex, I'm sure, has no interest in making the investment to install it. So installing level 2 EV chargers across the street at the shopping center, I'm trying to understand what the use case is for my constituents in that scenario. Because if you're going to use a level 2 charging station to charge to any significant degree, you're going to need to be there for hours. So is it that they're going to drive across the street to the shopping center, plug in their car and leave it there for 6 hours or leave it there overnight? Is it that they're going to plug in for 10 or 15 minutes as they run into the grocery store? What is the use case for the level 2 chargers targeted to the equity emphasis areas? And how will that encourage EV adoption in those areas? Obviously, I understand the use case for a level 3 charger there, right? There's a level 3 charger in that shopping center and you live across the street, you can pop over and in 15 or 20 minutes, maybe charge what you need for the week to get to and from work. But I don't quite understand the level 2 scenario.
Right. I'm going to ask Haley to get into a little bit more on the use case. In general, the locating publicly accessible EV charging stations is a purely public-private transaction where you have to work with the private entity in terms of access to their, and particularly with level 2, where at least a minimum 4-hour charge is required. So there are certainly what times of the day might be best in a publicly accessible for level 2, and what some of the transactional arrangements could be with that private property owner. Those go into the broader considerations. But Haley, do you want to jump in to answer the question here?
Yeah, so again, these are general recommendations. If as jurisdictions are looking at specific site recommendations, they think that this particular parcel of land might be better suited for direct current fast chargers, they could absolutely install a direct current fast charger there. These are parcels of land that our analysis indicates would be most likely to be highly utilized based on traffic patterns and proximity to site characteristics. But similarly, level 2 EV charging stations are more affordable typically to build out than direct current fast chargers. They require fewer utility capacity and grid infrastructure upgrades to support them. One of the limitations to the analysis is we weren't able to get grid capacity data for some of these locations, and typically electrical capacity and grid infrastructure is not always as well built out in particular underserved communities. So level 2 kind of takes that into consideration, so we can at least put infrastructure in the ground. But if we could do something like DC Fast, also absolutely recommended. It's not prescriptive.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I appreciate that. Obviously, I recognize that level 3 is exponentially more expensive and exponentially more challenging to install. I guess I would just question the assertion that for somebody living in a multifamily home community, having a level 2 charger in the shopping center nearby or in a public space nearby would tip the scales to make an EV possible for them. I just don't think it works. I don't understand what it would do to help somebody make the leap to purchasing an EV to having just a level 2 charger across the street.
Again, I think
The
one
goal
of
is
the
also that they wouldn't be driving these vehicles to empty. That's not recommended charging etiquette for vehicles. So folks with these vehicles would likely need shorter dwell times anyways to top up. We wouldn't want to recommend necessarily DC fast charging every opportunity that everyone would plug in to charge their vehicles. It's not great for battery life, and we also wouldn't recommend folks driving their batteries to zero either.
Also, Mr. Workinshaw, I think the other point, the earlier caveat that I tried to communicate is this: the parcel level identification in this methodology is not to be taken as a
Well, and I'm using it also just as an example. I mean, I'm not, this specific shopping center, I don't know, but that seems to be that the focus for level 2 chargers is publicly accessible places, in equity emphasis areas. And I'm just not quite understanding how that will help people in that. I understand if it's in their community, in the apartment complex, they can plug it in overnight. I don't see how this would make a difference for people, quite frankly.
And that kind of location might indeed be the best or the optimum location within that given area. I know.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks. All right. I see 2. So I have Takis here and I see Mayor Ashton online. We'll just maybe be mindful of our time. Go ahead.
Thank you. So actually it rhymes with what James was saying, because, you know, in the current practice we are facing every day, you know, do we reward and propose trickle charging, you know, kind of ubiquitous trickle charging, which already exists in single family homes or can exist in single family homes. Not always a given, because not everywhere in the region are people parking, you know, on site. There's the issue of with you know, curb charging, on which I get a lot of, you know, conflicting input from constituents. Some who say yes, please, you know, curb charging all the time, and then the others who are, you know, increasingly persuasive for me say, no, wait a minute, we are not trying here to replicate the fossil fuel mobility and, you know, have ubiquitous availability of fuel. Versus concentrated, you know, electrical infrastructure, because this is for us a huge problem right now. It is very difficult to get from power companies for any new project, multifamily project, etc. It is now a higher burden to get sufficient supply. And then it's an additional burden to have to size properly the electric infrastructure that these multifamily buildings need, and, you know, how to site them, etc. Over time, I've evolved. My thinking, at least, has evolved towards a predilection for level 3 charging as infrastructure hubs in the territory that serve multiple constituencies, including the very problematic and difficult issue of equity in transportation. So how is the modeling here, the REVI strategy, incorporating all the other aspects? So for example, you know, electric infrastructure availability, multi-use of electric infrastructure, because we are talking about electrification of buildings, et cetera, so all this has to be sized and located in a way that works not only for EV charging, but for other things. And the third one is, we are talking a lot, and it's part of the strategy, the 2050 strategy, to actually make it, the use of the model of private locomotion is not the preferred use. Therefore, for example, we could always say, I have constituents who say, why do you want to invite cars in your downtown areas? Why do you want to make it so available for them to do that? So this is a question for me. How do I read the document in the sense that informs prioritization of infrastructure decisions? Right now, everybody is asking for trickle charging everywhere. And I'm finding it increasingly difficult to actually say yes to that.
So I'll just simply note that this analysis or the methodology does not account for all the extraneous challenges that go into siting and actually building an EV charging station. And you've eloquently identified a few of those, whether it is power or whether it is the community buy-in, what have you. All it does is, based on the demand, travel demand, and based on the prevailing land use where in-house charging capability is not likely to exist, what are some of the optimum locations? Deciding and implementing this it's quite involved. There's a lot of considerations, and I hope that we have captured that in the limitations chapter of the report. If not, we will, based on today's discussion, I'll make sure that that is very clearly noted, that there are a number of other factors that go into finalizing the siting location. Again, the idea here is to point to, we are almost 4,000 square miles. And as I've said, we have about 18 million trips being made in this region every single day. And only about 7.5% of that is on transit, right? So 18 million trips. And even if you say 10% is on transit, 90% is on automobiles. So this is saying, if you envision 70%, 80% of that transitioning to electric fuel, that is one way you can reduce greenhouse gases. What will be the demand for refueling stations or charging stations? So it's really an exercise that is based on the travel demand. It is not so detailed as to be able to say that here's a checklist of things that you can go down and say, this is what you could do. But I agree with you that something like that, maybe in the second step of this, might be useful to say what are all the factors that need, and I think Mr. Walkinshaw has identified some. What are some of the considerations that go into putting a level 2 versus a level 3? Where, yes, it costs more, but if the use case is not going to be strong for putting a level 2, you might as well not put a level 2 at all. So I think that's what this study is not designed to do yet.
Yes, okay. I was just looking for philosophical guidance to begin to think forward, because there's also the big misconception that electric mobility is cheaper mobility. And we even heard today testimony that this is not a viable and sustainable way forward.
Thank you. Mayor Ashton?
Thank you for all the comments and for the work on this. I do own EV and fully support this and have been working to support fleet conversion in my own city and put electric in Rockville, not only in our parking lots, but also in public rights of way. So we're excited about this plan. I do think that as we look at putting EV, to me, it also should pair with also trying to attach that EV charging to renewable sources. That's our ultimate goal. That's just a comment. My questions are, I saw that there were various goals, like Maryland, DC have certain goals for, I think, 600,000 EV registrations. I'm wondering, is similar to the housing goals that we put forward, if we might get more micro with, who is going to be putting these in, and how do we get to the overarching goals that we set forward? I think that might be a good strategy to build on the plan that you all put together, and just wanted to make that comment. On the note of level 2 versus 3, I think level 2 is great for at home. I mean, I use it at home. But if you want economic development or people to actually use it out and about, sometimes you do need that level 3 in more places. So I just wanted to add to some of the comments that folks said on that. And then the last comment / situation analysis that I wanted to make is the plan does rely on upgrades and transformers, and there is a national shortage. I just think that we have to have more conversations about how do we encourage more production locally so that we can meet our electrification goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see anyone else's hands. So we'll thank you to the staff. And for those who are looking, if you check your meeting packet materials, you can find a copy of the report that everyone was referencing. We'll go to our 8th item on the agenda. I just want everyone to be mindful of the time. It's 1:35 and we're trying to end promptly at 2. So we are behind. So it's the 2023 Washington-Baltimore Regional Air Passenger Survey, general findings. We're briefed by Dr. Ken Joe on the findings and hear about the trends. Ken?
Great. Thank you so much, Chair Henderson. And good afternoon to the Transportation Planning Board. I'm Ken Joe, Principal Statistical Survey Analyst, which means that I like surveys and data. So I am excited to be here to share some of our general findings from our Regional Air Passenger Survey. So we've had a long history of conducting air passenger surveys at the TPB at our region's 3 major airports. I'm sure you've all flown out of BWI,
Dulles, and national airports. We've been conducting the survey for over 4 decades. And we've used the survey results to better understand more about the purpose of air travel. The passengers, air passengers travel, how they get to the airports, so ground access. So maybe in the future, we'll see more EVs used to get to the airports. And also why they chose a particular airport. So this is really, it's a core part of our continuous airport systems planning program, which is carried under the oversight of the TPB's Aviation Technical Subcommittee. So the Regional Air Passenger Survey, this is an at-gate intercept survey that provides origin and destination information that is considered essential for developing our regional travel demand models, airport ground access, transportation planning, airport and terminal facility planning, and forecasting air passenger travel demand. So we will share some of the results. A quick overview. I know we're running a bit late on time, so provide a brief overview of the survey, and then we'll dive into the general findings. All right, so this regional air passenger survey was conducted last October at our 3 regional airports. We did conduct a pre-test last spring because we implemented some changes to the methodology. So traditionally, it was conducted as a paper survey. And so with emerging technology and trends, we had implemented a electronic-based data collection method where passengers were asked to scan a QR code and to take the survey on their phone, or also interviewers went around and asked passengers to take the survey using a tablet. So this presentation will highlight general findings from the Regional Air Passenger Survey, drawn from the weighted data, focusing on air passenger characteristics, ground access, and preferences and behavior. We had surveyed 486 flights across the 3 airports, which yielded about 9,600 valid responses. All right, so in terms of employments across the region has steadily increased from 2017 to 2023, with about 421 increase since 2019. Local originations decreased slightly from 80 to 79% compared to 2019. By each airport, DCA had the largest share of local originations at 87%, followed by BWI and IAD. Compared with 2019, local originations decreased slightly at BWI and DCA while increasing at IAD. And by each airport in 2023, BWI had the largest number of employments, followed by DCA and IAD. Now let's look at employment share by airport. So employments across the airports were nearly evenly split. In third, since 2019, BWI had the employment share fell slightly from 36 to 34%. DCA's total employment share slightly increased from 32 to 33%, and IAD's total employment share slightly decreased from 33 to 32% since 2019. Now let's look at passenger characteristics. So looking at the share of resident versus non-resident passengers across the region, the share of non-resident passengers remained larger than the share of resident passengers, although the share of resident passengers has been slowly increasing. In 2023, the largest share of non-resident passengers were reported at DCA, about 2/3 non-resident passengers. Just over half of BWI's passengers were non-resident, and just under half of IAD's passengers were non-resident passengers. And since 2019, there was not much change in the share of resident and non-resident passengers, except for IAD, where the share of resident passengers increased from 45 to 54%. Now, looking at the distribution of age of the passengers in the region, the age distribution of passengers in the region are almost evenly split between 25 and 34, 35 and 44, and 45 and 54 years at around 20%. And the youngest and the oldest age groups comprise a smaller proportion of passengers. Now, looking at the breakdown by trip purpose, which shows categories of business trip purposes shown in orange and non-business trip purposes shown in purple. On the right, you could see the categories that comprise business and non-business trip purpose categories. And across the region, the share of business-related travel, which includes business related to the federal government, state and local government, and other business, have steadily declined since 2017, with a 5% drop from 2019 to 2023, which likely reflects a drop in post-pandemic business travel. Conversely, the share of non-business travel, including vacation, personal or family affairs, and student and school-oriented travel, has steadily increased since 2017. And we can observe that the drop in business travel is reflected for all three airports, which is really interesting. However, the drop in business-related travel was sharpest for IAD, with a 10% drop in business-related travel from 2019 to 2023. And a decline in business travel was also observed for BWI and DCA as well, albeit to a lesser degree. And business-related travel remained highest for DCA, comprising nearly 40% of travel, while only a quarter of passengers at BWI and IAD travel for business. Now, this chart breaks down the trip purpose by the individual categories, and we can observe a similar trend in the decline of business-related travel across nearly all categories. I know there's a lot of numbers here, and we don't have enough time to go through it all, so you could look at it at your leisure. Now, let's look at the breakdown of passengers by household income. Now, region-wide across for all the airports, the share of passengers earning more than $200,000 a year was highest at 34%, comprising about 1/3 of all passengers. Considering that the median household income in this region is roughly $100,000, air travelers in the region tend to be more affluent, with nearly 3/4 of passengers with household incomes more than $100,000. And this pattern appears to hold for all three airports, although BWI had a notably higher share of passengers with household incomes less than $100,000. So to summarize the key takeaways on passenger characteristics, so non-resident passengers continue to outnumber resident passengers, although the share of resident passengers has been gradually increasing across the region. The youngest and oldest age groups represent the smaller proportions of passengers compared with other age ranges. If you remember anything from my presentation today, it should be about business travel, because I think that is something, of course, we all know that the pandemic had a major impact on travel, and a major impact on how we conduct our business. And so business travel has declined, while non-business has increased across the region at all airports. I mean, maybe part of this could be considered revenge, travel, where people are just, have been under the pandemic, under stay-at-home orders, and they're traveling everywhere. So it'll be interesting to see when we conduct our next survey whether this pattern continues to hold. So you'll see in 2 years when I present that. More than a third of passengers in the region earn over $200,000 annually, having household incomes exceeding $100,000. Now let's look at ground access. So this chart shows where passengers started their ground trips to the airport for the entire region, shown by the pie chart on the left, and passenger origins for each airport for 2017, 2019, and 2023. So region-wide, the majority of air passengers started their ground trip to the airport from their private residence, followed by hotel and motel, and together they comprise over 90% of trip origins. And comparing between airports, DCA had a notably lower share of trips starting at a private residence and a higher share of trips originating at a hotel or motel than BWI or IAD, reflecting the higher share of business travelers at DCA. And looking at the temporal trends for each airport, the share of passenger trips starting at a hotel or motel decreased for IAD, which likely reflects the drop in business travelers at DCA from 2019 to 2023. Now, looking at passenger mode access, how people got to the airports, and how that has changed over the past several years, we can see that private car remains the dominant mode of access to the airport, just comprising under half of all trips to the airport. It increased slightly from 2019. However, and this is another important takeaways for TNCs, transportation network companies, Uber and Lyft, has steadily increased since 2017, now comprising one quarter of all trips to the airport. Stunning, actually. Conversely, taxi use has dropped from 11 to 5% since 2017. And the share of trips by transit has remained steady at around 8% since 2017. Now, looking at passenger mode access for each of the airports, among passenger travel modes, the share of passengers who travel to the airport by private car was highest at BWI at 55%, followed by IAD at 49%, and it was lowest at DCA at 30%. And the share of passengers who used TNCs were highest at DCA at 37%, followed by IAD at 24% and BWI at 17%. And the share of passengers who used transit was significantly higher for DCA compared with IAD and BWI. Looking at passenger mode access by airport and how that has changed, we could see that TNC usage has steadily increased for all airports, while taxi usage has declined. Also, private car usage has dropped from 2017 to 2019, but rebounded in 2023, most notably at DCA, while rental car usage slightly dropped at BWI, remained steady at DCA, and dropped at IAD. And transit usage has remained steady at BWI, slightly dropped at DCA, and increased at IAD. Now, if we look at passenger mode status, passenger mode access by resident status, whether they're residents in the region or non-residents, we could see that for residents, the largest share by far travel to the airport by private car, followed by TNC. Private car use remains steady. TNC share notably increased, and transit usage has slightly increased. But we can see that for non-residents, they have a much higher share of modes other than private car, rental car, taxis, TNCs. And since 2019, private car and rental car usage has slightly dropped, while TNC usage sharply increased. Now, these charts show the change in passenger mode access originating from home and non-home locations from 2019 to 2023. For airport trips originating from home, the share of trips by private car and taxi decreased, while the share of trips by TNC and transit increased. And for airport trips originating from non-home locations, the share of trips by taxi and hotel, motel, courtesy bus decreased, while the share of trips by TNC and transit increased. And these charts, on this chart, shows the changes in passenger mode access for business and non-business air travel from 2019 to 23. For business travel, the share of trips by TNCs increased, while the share of trips by rental car and taxi decreased, and private car and transit remained relatively steady. Whereas for non-business travel, the share of trips by TNC, taxi, and rental car increased, while the share of trips by private car and taxi decreased. This chart here shows the share of passengers who are dropped off at the airport curbside. Overall, DCA had the highest share of passengers who are dropped off, followed by IAD and BWI. Across the region, the share of airport trip drop-offs declined from 3/4 to about 2/3 of airport trips. So these are some of the key takeaways for ground access. I think probably the most important takeaway here from those listed is TNC usage has steadily risen across all airports, accounting for 1/4 of all airport trips. Now on to preferences and behavior.
Ken?
Yes.
I'm so sorry, just a time check for you. It is 1:54, so if you can speed it up.
Okay,
Thank
will
you.
do. So these two charts show the top reasons for why passengers chose to fly out of the airport. You can see the region for 2019 on the left, 2023 on the right. The largest share of passengers chose closest airport as the top reason for choosing their airport. And this is for all 3 airports. And then these were for each of the individual airports at BWI. You can see that, for BWI, the largest share chose closest airport as their reason for choosing their airport. But DCA had a larger proportion of those that chose closest airport. And then this is the breakdown for DCA, which some of the more major reasons for why passengers choose to fly out of IAD is less expensive airfare and only airport with nonstop direct flights. And this is reasons for choosing mode of interest. In the interest of time, I'll skip that. And then for the pandemic, we also asked some questions about typical mode of travel to the airport before the pandemic and expected mode of travel post-pandemic. So across the region, the share of passengers who indicated private or rented car as their preferred mode of travel decreased slightly, and these trends were also reflected for each airport. However, the share of passengers who indicated taxi or ride hail increased slightly from pre to post-pandemic, and the share of passengers that were using public transit declined from pre to post-pandemic for BWI and DCA, but notably it increased for Dulles, which is likely due to the extension of the Silver Line to Dulles. So that summarizes my key takeaways in terms of preferences and behavior. The largest share of air passengers chose the airport because it was the closest airport. Convenience was the top reason for choosing mode of access. And then from pre to post-pandemic, the share of passengers who typically travel to the airport by private or rented car decreased slightly, while the share of passengers who typically used taxi or ride hail increased in the region. So I know there's a lot of numbers. So thank you for bearing with me. I'd like to thank our TPB staff, Tim Kanan, Olga Perez, Suraj Vijini, and Zhou Yang, as well as our airport partners at the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority and the Maryland Aviation Administration. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you. And I know there's not much time, but maybe you might have time for a quick question or two.
Thanks, Ken. Does anyone have a burning question? Can't see anyone online. All right. You know, we all have the slides from the presentation as well as Ken's contact information. So if anyone wants to follow up with a question after having an opportunity to review the data in more full, we can certainly make that available. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you.
To Ken, you and your team. We have to skip item 9 on the agenda. We'll try to get to that in October. Item 10 is a quick announcement. If Janie's here.
Hello, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll try to keep this brief in the interest of time. As you had mentioned earlier in the meeting, we are planning a we are planning a safety event for this fall, and the anticipated date is Thursday, October 31st. We are currently engaging potential speakers, including safety officials at the USDOT Secretary's Office, as well as subject matter experts to participate in a series of panels. And board members should be watching for a formal announcement and event in the coming weeks. In addition, if you have any suggestions for potential topics to address during the event, we invite you to reach out to myself or Conti. And happy to take any questions if there are any.
All right, thanks, Janie. And again, they'll be sending out the information. Please mark your calendars. Just hold it now. Just hold it now. It's Halloween. Just hold it now. We'll make sure you get home in time to. Oh, a safety event that will be scary. Yeah. Oh, okay. Maybe we didn't pick the right themes, but it's going to be great. So that concludes our agenda for today. Thanks so much to everyone. Thank you to all the presenters and to the TPB staff. Our next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, October 16th, 2024, and this meeting is adjourned.
It's virtual. It's virtual in
Oh,
October.
sorry, and it's a virtual
important
meeting.
for everyone to know. We'll
All right.
be here, but you guys don't have to be.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.